Today's film is Schindler's List. It's like the fastest 3 hours and 15 minutes of film that I've ever seen.
True.
In terms of like how easy it is to watch. It does raise the question of should a movie about the Holocaust be like go by that quickly? I'm not saying it's not like horrifying in parts. Of course it is, but like it's still like definitely like a bearable movie to watch.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it should be totally unbearable because then what would be the point of making it? But like I just wonder. I'm not saying it's a problem, but
Yeah.
I'm just like asking.
No, I get it.
Like,
this
should a movie about the Holocaust be like a little bit more unbearable?
This is a
know?
good question, and it's a good way to start off the episode, because I will say that this is one of the reasons why I was maybe more open to putting this film off, was
Right.
because it just seemed like, oh, gee, okay, that one's going to be heavy. That one's going to be hard to talk about. And maybe it's good to put this at the beginning of the episode too, because maybe people are thinking the same going into a discussion of this film. Like,
Yeah.
oh, here we go.
Right.
But, actually, yeah, the film is very watchable, very, dare I say, entertaining.
Yes.
There's a certain kind of stylization, too,
Yes.
in the way that things are presented. Not just the fact that the film is black and white, but there's the cigarette smoke, and then there's the hard shadows on Liam Neeson's face and his eyes being illuminated, or there's sort of interesting profiles or framing where he's tipping off the maitre d' and like,
and there's like a ton of like montage with music. That's part of why like the film goes along at like such a clip. There's like
so it's clear when you're watching this that this is
this is like a highly accomplished like work of Hollywood filmmaking.
Exactly. Which is maybe a little off-putting if you're expecting to go into a film that's going to be this heavy, hard look at the Holocaust.
Right.
It begins with like Liam Neeson, like, working the room and like popping champagne. It's kind of odd.
Yeah. Although to be fair, like it begins with a Shabbat service.
Yes.
So the movie begins in color with the Shabbat service and focuses in on the candles, and the color gets sort of drained away. But mostly it's black and white, and that may have a documentary feel, or that may have been intended to have a documentary feel. But I don't know how much it succeeds in making it have a documentary feel versus like making it have a classic Hollywood
right
feel.
Because then it's like very sumptuously lit and
that's the thing.
Very clean cinematography, and so there is like
or like noirish things going on.
Totally. So yeah, it gives it, I think it probably straddles all of these things, where it's feeling a little documentary and then a little Hollywood and then a little like we kind of get back to what we started this episode with, which is on the one hand, this helps everything go down and it makes it a lot more accessible, a lot more watchable. But on the other hand, it raises this question of, is this appropriate? And I don't know. I think that's, I don't personally have an issue with it, but easy for me to say, I'm not, as far as I know, very directly touched by the Holocaust. Although I had relatives who were involved certainly in World War II. But I think that my knee-jerk reaction, or my reaction now, is probably colored by the fact that this movie, I don't think, would ever get made in the way that it was made today. I just don't think you would ever, and I know that this is like kind of a refrain on this podcast, but this is an interesting film because this is 1993. This is actors who are very, very familiar to us, and a director who's very familiar to us.
Yeah.
It's not that long ago.
No.
But this, I think, is like,
well, it's 30 years ago. Isn't that crazy? 30 years, man.
Yeah. Hey.
Anyway, sorry, go on.
I think you put this in front of a group of college students today, there would be like some real problems.
Yeah, maybe.
About, okay, I think that the biggest
centering German character.
Exactly. I think the biggest problem would be getting over this hang up of we're seeing things from this German's perspective, and then we're being made to sympathize with him.
Right.
And then care about his conversion and like forgive him, you know? Like this is a level of humanity that I don't think we're capable of, at least publicly. And the fact that this movie, from what I can tell, isn't sort of shoehorning in any kind of like political narrative or agenda, as far as I can tell.
Mm-hmm.
There's no sort of like scene about undocumented immigrants or something, or like a scene about, you know, fascist like Trump or something. sorry, but you know what I mean? Like if this was made today, like people wouldn't be there wouldn't be the artistic restraint not to sort of like get into the weeds of like connecting this somehow to any number of like particular platform issues.
I can't like agree or disagree with, because I just never watch these kinds of movies when they come out now. Like I haven't seen 12 Years a Slave, for instance. It may well be the case that 12 Years a Slave like demonstrates some of the same good qualities that we're talking about here. So I don't want to just like assume, you know, but I understand the general tendency.
I'm thinking of an experience that I had in art school when to a group of grad students, we showed, I was a TA for this class. We showed this amazing documentary called The Act of Killing. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I've heard of it. I've always wanted to see it.
It's an incredible documentary. And I forget where it takes place. I think it's
Indonesia.
And there's it's basically documenting the kind of reality of these kill squads that committed this just like atrocious genocide. But it's kind of told from their perspective, because this documentary filmmaker goes in and he works with these guys where basically they kind of get excited about the idea of being in a movie about what they've done like 20 years earlier or whatever. It's really remarkable.
Yeah.
And so they reenact a lot of these atrocities.
Yeah.
And they do it up kind of like they're doing like a Hollywood movie. And it's horrifying, but then seeing the effect that it has on these guys as they're reliving what they did 10, 15, 20 years ago as young men. I don't want to say anything more because I want people to experience the documentary, but it's remarkable the effect that it ends up having on some of them in terms of having to take a closer look at what they did and deal with that. And maybe open up some things that they have been burying. And so because the documentary succeeded at kind of humanizing these perpetrators of gross injustice, there was a flat out revolt among the students, grad students. And I know I keep repeating that, but like these are like older people who you would expect to be able to look at something with a certain degree of you know, openness and maturity. And they're in the theater school too. You would think that this topic of reenactment and its sort of efficacy at unlocking things in the human psyche would be really relevant to them. But there was like a flat out rejection of any, like, one of the things that was said was, I don't even see why a film like this should ever be made. Why should I ever see something from the perspective of these people? And it was like, whoa, to think that like you are really so different from this kind of evil, that you have nothing in common, basically, you know, that there can be no advantage to sort of to thinking at things from their perspective. And this is interesting because this is something that Schindler explicitly says in the film. He's talking to his accountant, I think, about
Hermann Goeth.
Yeah, about Ray Fiennes' character. And he's saying, You know, you need to look at things from his perspective. He's under a lot of pressure. If it weren't war, he would be all right. Now, there's a little bit
I find it kind of like a ridiculous statement.
But there's some truth to it,
Yeah.
right? Is that like war does bring out the worst in people, right? And
yeah, that's what he says. He says
he says,
and he's got the war, which brings out the worst in people. Never the good, always the bad. Always the bad.
Yeah.
Which I think is ironic because the war actually brings out the best in Schindler.
Well,
ultimately.
but I think that he's talking about himself. I think that there's some introspection going on in this scene because this, you said that I don't know that there's any one moment of his conversion.
Okay.
And I would point to this scene as being
Really?
it. Yeah, because he comes in there. I think it's this scene. He comes in there being very antagonistic, very combative about like, what am I supposed to do? There's nothing I can do about it.
Right.
He's a murderer. He's a psycho. He's really not that bad, but
Right.
war just brings out the worst in people.
Right.
And I think that he can hear himself. He's working something out because by the end of that, he says he gives him the names of the two elderly people that he wants him to specifically go save. And he takes off his own watch and gives it to him to be used as a bribe.
Right.
So it's like, and then from that point forward, his orientation changes, you know? But this theme of like, you have to look at things from his perspective. This is what makes Schindler so effective as a con man. And I keep using this word, and what I mean is a confidence man. He exudes confidence. And so he's able to sell people on whatever. And so he knows he knows what they want to hear.
Yeah.
When he sells Eamon, Ray Fiennes' character, on the idea of forgiveness, how does he do it? He sells it to him as the powerful thing to do. Right?
Yeah.
So he knows this guy well enough that he can very confidently sell him.
Yeah. Of course, it doesn't last very long.
Well, okay, because it's not as simple as that.
Yeah.
But it's true.
Yeah.
It's true. That's an incredible scene.
Right.
Because when he looks at him and says, "No, that is power."
Right.
There's like, on the one hand, yeah, he is trying to sell him on something.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, he's not lying.
Right.
You know, and I thought about God's mercy as being the thing that is like most
Yeah.
clearly an expression of his omnipotence.
Right.
You know?
Right.
And
Yes.
so what you see is Eamon basically in his own kind of perverted way. And it's actually kind of humorous in a
Right.
you know, kind of devastating way. Wrestling with this.
Right.
He kind of tries to go for it.
Because he tells him like this is what the emperors would do.
Right.
And so the way that Aemon does it is he lifts up his two fingers almost like Christ or something. He's like, I
Right.
pardon you. And he
yeah.
even does it to himself in the mirror at one point.
Right.
Like it's just a very strange.
Yeah, but you can see that it's not easy.
Right.
You know, and in fact it's almost as though it proves
It's like very uncomfortable for him.
right.
Yeah.
And it almost proves
His weakness.
his weakness
Yeah.
in Schindler's point.
Yeah.
You know?
Totally.
But yeah, so I know that I've kind of been like on a bit of a monologue here, but these questions of you know, from whose perspective,
Yeah.
I kind of find them to be just kind of repugnant because it treats the suppressed premise seems to be that we don't have anything in common, or that your perspective is threatening, and
Right.
I mean, it is kind of threatening. It's threatening to your sense of like righteousness,
Right.
Because you might find that you actually have more in common with this monster than you would like to admit. You might even find that you sympathize, you know,
Yeah.
which is a scary proposition.
Yeah. That is interesting too, because like it does touch on like the way that the Holocaust is treated as like, and I'm not doing the like, well, Stalin killed more people and why don't we talk about that thing? Not that like has no legitimacy, but just the fact that it's treated as this like unique in human history
Right.
monstrosity, and it strikes us that way in many ways for good reasons, but also like it's not like it was done by this different like species of people, you know?
Right. The capacity for human cruelty is no different,
Yes.
you know, than it really is at any stage in human history. And looking at a figure like Aemon, it's like this is just a classic
Yeah.
psychopath.
Yes.
You know?
Absolutely. Yeah, and he was not only that, but he was like, even before the war ended, he was like put in a mental institution like by the SS.
Wow.
Like they diagnosed him
Wow.
with mental illness.
Yeah. Wow.
And then he was later hung. But you also see it in like Germany's relationship to the Holocaust today. There was this amazing essay in First Things.
We should link to that. That essay is awesome.
One of my favorite essays I've ever read in First Things, called The Vanity of Guilt by a German writer, Andreas Lombard. And not to go too deep into it, but basically it's about this idea that like Germany is like in despair because it thinks that like its crime in the 20th century is like
cannot
so
be forgiven.
It's so that it's so unique that it's like it puts them in a like world historically different status, and that like they basically Germany like doesn't deserve to exist anymore because of this, and because they don't have like Christ, and like they haven't like the Holocaust, like facing up to the Holocaust didn't result in like a mass conversion of the German people. Unfortunately, like they're responding to it in this like very dysfunctional way of like national self-hatred.
Right.
So that is partially, of course, mainly because of like the lack of Christ, but like also because of this, like the reason he calls it the vanity of guilt is it because there is like a vanity in like saying that like you have the power to commit a crime so great that it can't be forgiven, you know? And that, I mean, that goes back to the point about like forgiveness being like the greatest power of all. Right.
So I think that this is a really remarkable film, not just because, you know, not just because it's about this amazing story that ought to be known. It's a good story, but also because it's dealing so deftly with these themes of forgiveness and you know, perspective, and it would be too, I don't know, I don't want to say it's too easy, but it would just be the obvious choice to do a film about the Holocaust from the perspective of someone on the, you know, suffering from a Jewish Holocaust victim.
Right.
And that film has been made.
Yeah.
But this is amazing in that it's about the kind of the worst kind of war criminal that we can, that a lot of people can think of. You know, second, if it's not about someone who's actually committing genocide, it's someone profiting on it. You know, like a war profiteer. We so often sort of equate to be like the worst of the worst.
Yeah.
So there's really something in here for.
Well, to be fair, he's not making weapons; he's making like pots and pans for the army, which does make a difference in how we perceive him.
Sure. Yeah, and then at the end, when he does start producing weapons, he's deliberately producing bad weapons,
which felt like there's no way that's really what it was in real life, but apparently, yeah, in real life, the munitions factory that he ran like never produced like a single like functioning shell, which is so awesome.
That is awesome.
Yeah, the ultimate like con artist, and apparently he was like pretty unremarkable like guy before and after the war. He was kind of like a failure in business. The film's like epilogue titles say that like he was a failure in his marriage, you know?
Yeah, right.
And so it's kind of remarkable just like how that situation could like bring something out of him, you know?
Right.
In a different way from Amen Gut. I don't think the film is like just about Schindler, because I mean, like I was struck by like the focus on like names, just like listing names in this film from the very beginning when like the Jews are coming in to be registered in Krakow, and then like turning that around with like the various ways in which names are listed, ultimately culminating in like, you know, Schindler's List of Jews that instead of going to Auschwitz are going to be going to his new factory in what's now Czechoslovakia. And that itself, like, it is that's why it is truly like a Holocaust movie and not just like a movie about some like incident that happened during the Holocaust, you know, because of just like the focus on like the like quasi liturgical like intonation and like writing of these names, you know, and then like it does it again with like the documentary segment at the end. But yeah, I think that, I don't know, I don't think, as much as the film is easy to watch, I don't think that it's like not morally challenging.
Right.
One criticism you could level at it, and has been leveled at it, is that like its focus for like Nazi villainry is on this like psychopath, you know, rather than on like more on the like the ordinary Germans.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Sure. But it's also not maybe necessarily what the film is about, because I think that there is a kind of there's a kind of foil in Amen. Not exactly, but there's a kind of doubling going on between
Totally.
Schindler and Amen. So I think that for the film's purposes, they kind of need to focus it in this way.
Yeah, for sure.
But
yes, that's very true. And then but you do get like moments, like there's a few moments in the film that are especially chilling, of like children like hating Jews, you know.
Yeah.
Like and so like that does make you think about like just the normal society level thing that's going on here,
yeah.
you know.
Yeah, I mean, you can't with one movie, even a movie that's 3 hours and 15 minutes long, you can't make like the definitive Holocaust film.
Right.
But I think that you can aspire to make a great Holocaust pop culture film, basically, you know, and because for better or for worse, these things ought to be addressed in the popular culture. Yeah. You know, it's not like pop culture should just be like completely void of any kind of I
mean, it's like, does every crucifix have to be like the bloodiest possible depiction? I mean, like, yeah, like it's totally true. Like, we can be like wimps about the Passion, and so like I love those really bloody depictions, but like there's a place for different emphases, even for spiritual purposes, but also just for like easing people into these realities as like best you can. And like, you know, as much as people might like cavil at Schindler's List, in another 100 or 200 years, and it's already kind of happening with young people today, like the Holocaust is going to be forgotten, not forgotten literally, but like in the sense that it's going to become more and more of like this abstract event that you learn about in your history books. So like, I think the value of a film like this probably becomes greater over time, even if it isn't like displaying like the full horror and like in the heaviest way. It's plenty horrifying, and it does make it real to you. Yeah. And so I think that this film, like, ultimately it's going to be like do more of a service to like the remembrance of the horrors of the Holocaust than, you know what I mean?
Yeah, because you know, I think that we take for granted, oh yeah, I grew up with you know, my grandfather was in the war, my great uncle, you know, there's a closeness still, but the more remote that historical event becomes, and the more and more that immediacy is lost, the more you're going to need things like this that are sort of, well, I think that it's clear that that's part of the project for Spielberg. If you look at this film, you look at Saving Private Ryan, it seems that clearly part of his priority is to, like I mentioned at the top of the show, like get some of these people on camera before they die. You know, these are elderly people, and we have this opportunity to tell a story and tell it in a very compelling way, and then also end the film, cap it off with seeing some of these people actually alive together with the actors who portrayed them. Yeah, I mean that has an impact and a utility in keeping this keeping this fresh, you know, keeping it immediate, keeping it alive is something that isn't just lost to the history books, you know. One other thing that I'll mention is several years ago when I was still in LA, I saw this amazing puppet show. I think I might have talked about this on the podcast before, called Camp. And it was a the Holocaust. It was about Auschwitz. And this, I forget, it was this puppetry team. I forget where they were from, but the lead sort of puppeteer, his father or grandfather had died in Auschwitz, and what he did was they made this complete to scale miniature replica of Auschwitz that took up the whole space of the stage. This was a theatrical event.
Okay.
And then they went through and manipulated all of these tiny little figures representing the Germans and the Jewish prisoners.
Wow.
And then with a video camera, they would sort of frame these little interactions of terrible things happening, people throwing themselves into the electric fences or being taken into the gas chambers. And we have a scene like that in Schindler where we follow a group of women through the process of being taken to one of these chambers. Now, again, mercifully, it ends up being a legitimate shower.
Right.
But you know, up until that point, you really think this is it, and it's terrifying. And the effect, you know, made me think a lot about this theatrical puppetry experience that I had. It was probably about an hour long. Of this sort of all these events happening at Auschwitz being shown, being depicted with these little puppets, and it was so heavy and it was so intense, and it had to be puppets because it was like the puppets were the suitable container for that. Like what am I trying to say? Like I could not watch this if it was real people,
right?
You know, or if it was actual footage, right? You know, that would be really kind of impossible for me to watch. But because it was puppets,
yeah,
they somehow could contain all of that in a way that enabled me to actually enter into it, and the effect was remarkable. I keep using that word. I should come up with a better word. But it was unlike anything I've seen.
Oh.
And this film made me think about that because, you know, even though it's not puppetry, it's still this sort of like lighter form. This kind of the medium is something that is a more suitable container for me to really allow myself to go there, you know. And the film was tough to watch at a few points. That scene in the shower was very disturbing. You mentioned the stuff with children, separating families, you know, that like there were times when I teared up, and
the whole like liquidation of the ghetto sequence.
Oh, that sequence is incredible. It's so long. 15 minutes doesn't sound like long, especially when you're watching a 3-hour film, but the effect when you're watching it, it's like, wow, this is still going on.
But the way that it's intercut and like done in a montage way is like it's like, again, I hate to say it's like very entertaining at the same time. It's kind of a strange effect,
what does entertaining mean, right? I mean, it's not like I'm having so much fun.
No.
It's that it's keeping me sort of captivated, you know, that I'm sort of captured by this. And and so it brings me through it, you know, and it keeps me in it, even if maybe otherwise I would want to pull away, or you know, I couldn't handle, you know, like if it was any more intense than it is, right? It sort of carefully toes this line. It begins early in the morning when the soldiers are sort of just arriving in the ghetto and begin to round everyone up. And then it ends at night when the extermination and the hunting is still happening.
Right.
You know, and that's tough. That's tough. How do you render that cinematically and not lose people, you know?
Yeah. And we, you know, to refer to the puppet thing you were just talking about. Like there are parts where Schindler is watching from this hilltop, and then it has a little bit of that effect.
Everything is in miniature.
Yeah, everything is in miniature, and you're seeing people being gunned down in the street or
that was another effect of this puppetry performance, is that you really got a sense of the scale.
Right.
You know, when they laid out all these little figures, you know, oh man.